Shut up! They can hear us! The words were barely more than a breath, carried on the night air like a ghost. Ethan Caldwell froze mid-step, his hand still on the door handle of his black Range Rover. The parking garage was almost empty at this hour, just the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the faint echo of a distant elevator, the lonely tick of cooling metal from parked cars. He'd just wrapped a grueling board meeting, one of those long, polite bloodbaths where everyone smiles while sharpening their knives under the table. He'd told himself the tension in the room was paranoia. Now, hearing that voice, he wasn't so sure. He glanced over his shoulder. The garage's shadows seemed to breathe, pooling around concrete pillars. For a moment he saw nothing, just the dim outline of a sedan in the far corner, a row of empty spaces, the slow sweep of the security camera. Then, from the back seat of his own SUV, something shifted. Ethan's first thought was absurd. Maybe a bag had fallen over. Then the shadows moved again, and a pair of wide, dark eyes caught the dim light. A girl. She was small, 7, maybe 8 years old, with a wild halo of curly hair matted in places. Her clothes a mismatched mess of faded denim, and a t-shirt too big for her frame. Her knees were drawn up to her chest, sneakers scuffed beyond recognition. Dirt smeared her cheek like war paint, but her gaze was all calculation, like she was measuring whether to trust him or bolt into the night. Ethan straightened slowly, every instinct telling him not to spook her. "Who?" he began. "Quiet." She cut him off with the same urgency as before, her voice low but sharp. "They're still here, somewhere." Ethan blinked. "Who's?" "The man in the blue suit and the woman with the red scarf," she said quickly, as if afraid the details would slip away if she didn't speak them now. "They were talking upstairs, on the 10th floor. About you. About tomorrow. About getting you out." His chest tightened. "What?" "They said after you sign some papers in the morning, you won't be CEO anymore. That they'll make it look clean." She glanced past him into the shadows beyond, her body tensing like she expected someone to leap out. "They laughed about it." Ethan's mind tripped over itself, trying to connect the jagged pieces. There was only one man in a blue suit at that meeting, Lucas Crane, his oldest business partner. And the woman in the red scarf, Miranda Hayes, his personal assistant of 12 years. Both of them had been by his side since the early days of Caldwell Tech. Both had smiled in that boardroom tonight. Both had looked him in the eye. This was insane. It had to be. But the girl's stare was steady, unblinking. Ethan stepped closer to the car, his voice a low growl. "How do you know this?" "I was waiting by the vending machine," she said, her words tumbling out fast. "They didn't see me. The door to the meeting room was open a crack. I just listened." He studied her. She was either telling the truth or she was the most convincing liar he'd ever met. And after 30 years in corporate warfare, that was saying something. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally. "Neither should you," she shot back, her chin lifting in defiance. "If you go back up there, they'll know you know. Then you won't have a tomorrow." Her words carried a strange weight, more than a child's warning. There was no tremor, no uncertainty. Ethan hesitated, then opened the back door and crouched down so they were eye level. The stale scent of the garage mixed with something faint and sweet. Bubblegum, maybe, long since chewed away. "What's your name?" "Aria." "Aria what?" "Just Aria." He almost smiled at the stubbornness. "Well, just Aria, how about you tell me why you're in my car?" Her fingers picked at a loose thread on her jeans. "Because you leave your back door unlocked." That's not an answer. Her eyes flicked up to meet his. "Because I needed to tell you. No one listens when kids talk. But if I told you before it happened, maybe you'd believe me." Ethan felt the ground shift under him. "Why risk it?" She shrugged, a small movement. "Because I know what it's like to be erased." The words hit him harder than he expected. He thought of the way Lucas had looked at him in the meeting tonight, like a relic, like something that had outlived its usefulness. He thought of all the quiet betrayals he'd brushed off as office politics. A muscle in his jaw tightened. "Come on," he said, standing and offering his hand. "Let's get out of here." Arya hesitated, then slid her small hand into his. It was cold, bones delicate under the skin. She moved like someone used to walking quickly, quietly. They crossed the garage together. Ethan scanned the shadows, half expecting Lucas or Miranda to step out to confirm the nightmare. But the place was still, the only sound the echo of their footsteps. At his car, he opened the passenger door for her. Seatbelt. She climbed in without a word. Ethan slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled out of the garage. As the ramp curled upward, the city opened before them, streetlights casting thin halos on wet pavement, the high glass walls of Caldwell Tech reflecting the night like a fortress. In his peripheral vision, he saw Arya watching the building, her eyes dark and unreadable. "What exactly did they say?" he asked as they merged onto the empty boulevard. Her voice was steady. "They said they'd have the papers ready, that the contract with the foreign company would go through at 9 a.m., and by noon you'd be gone. They called it a quiet removal." Ethan gripped the wheel tighter. "And you understood all that?" She gave a small, humorless laugh. "When you've spent your life listening from the corners, you learn to understand things you're not supposed to." Something in her tone made him glance at her again. This was not a child who had been shielded from the world. They drove in silence for a while, the hum of the tires filling the space between questions. Finally, Ethan asked, "Where were you going before you found me?" Her gaze stayed on the window. "Nowhere." He didn't press. At a red light, he looked over at her fully for the first time. She was small, yes, but there was a gravity to her, a coiled tension, like she was always ready to run. He knew that posture. It was the same one he'd seen in young employees right before they were fired. The light turned green. He drove on. They passed the glowing facade of a 24-hour diner. Without thinking, Ethan flicked on the turn signal. "Hungry?" Arya shrugged, but he caught the flicker of interest before she hit it. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee and grilled onions. The booths were cracked vinyl, the kind that stuck to your skin. A waitress with tired eyes poured them water without asking. They sat across from each other in a corner booth. Arya kept her back to the wall, her eyes on the door. "You always sit like that?" he asked. "Like what?" "Where you can see the exits." She met his gaze. "Don't you?" He didn't answer. They ordered, pancakes for her, black coffee for him. When the food came, she ate like someone who hadn't in a while, cutting small bites but not wasting a second between them. Ethan sipped his coffee, watching her over the rim. "Tomorrow, when they try this, do you want to be there?" Her fork paused mid-air. "Why?" "Because if you're telling the truth, you might have just saved my career. And careers aren't the only thing at stake when people like Lucas and Miranda make moves like this. Sometimes the fallout hits a lot harder." She set the fork down slowly. "I'm telling the truth." He believed her. Against every instinct honed in boardrooms and negotiations, he believed her. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past, headlights slicing through the diner windows. The world went on, unaware that somewhere between the 10th floor of a glass tower and the cracked leather of a booth, A quiet war had just begun. Ethan leaned back, his mind already turning over possibilities, lines of attack, allies he could trust. He didn't know yet that this girl, with her guarded eyes and dirt-streaked face, was about to dismantle the most dangerous plot Caldwell Tech had ever seen. And he certainly didn't know that in saving him, she was about to change his life in a way that no boardroom coup ever could. The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly outside, casting red and blue flickers over the window as Arya leaned forward, elbows on the table. She had stopped eating, the pancakes gone cold in front of her. Ethan could see it, the way her mind was somewhere else, replaying something she couldn't shake. "What exactly did you hear?" he asked again, voice low, controlled. Arya didn't answer immediately. Her gaze was fixed on a smear of syrup, tracing it with the tines of her fork like she was mapping a road only she could see. "It wasn't just about you," she said finally. Ethan's stomach tightened. "Go on." "I was on the 10th floor," she began, her voice flattening as if slipping into a recording. "That hallway is always quiet at night, but I heard laughing coming from the big glass room. I knew I shouldn't be there, but—" She lifted one shoulder. "There's a vending machine right outside the conference rooms. It hums so loud it covers your steps." Ethan knew the spot she meant. He'd passed it 1,000 times, never thinking about the acoustics. "The door was open a little," she said. "Lucas was at the far end of the table. Miranda closer to the door. They were leaning toward each other, like they were sharing a secret no one else in the world could know. Lucas had a paper in his hand, a contract, I think. He tapped it, and Miranda laughed. Arya's eyes flicked to Ethan's. She said, "By the time he realizes it, he'll be gone. And we'll be in." The words landed in Ethan's chest like a hammer. They talked about a meeting tomorrow with a foreign company, something about signing a deal that's not really a deal. Lucas called it a placeholder, said it would justify moving a large amount of money overseas without anyone asking questions. Then he said, Arya's voice faltered for the first time. "What?" He said, "Once that's done, we make the vote, and Caldwell Tech is ours." For a moment, all Ethan could hear was the hum of the diner's refrigerator, the clink of cutlery from another booth. "Why didn't you just leave?" he asked. Arya's eyes sharpened. "Because I wanted to know how people like that talk when they think they're alone. I wanted to know how far they'd go." Ethan studied her. There was no bravado in her voice, no childish thrill of mischief. She had listened because she understood what it meant to be powerless and what it meant to finally have an edge. "They didn't see you?" he asked. She shook her head. "They weren't looking for anyone small." The truth in that made his chest ache in a way he didn't expect. Outside, a siren wailed faintly in the distance. Ethan glanced toward the window, half expecting to see Lucas's face appear in the glass, but the street was empty. He turned back to Arya. "Why come to me?" Her answer was immediate. "Because you're the one they want to erase, and I know what that feels like." Something in her tone told him this wasn't just a metaphor. "Who erases you, Arya?" She looked down at her hands. "Doesn't matter." "It matters to me." She hesitated, then said quietly, "When my grandma got sick, we moved around a lot. People stop seeing you when you're the kid with the sick guardian. You fade. Teachers forget your name. Neighbors don't notice you. You become furniture." Ethan felt the words sink in. He thought of his own life, the years building Caldwell Tech from nothing, the way he'd assumed loyalty was a permanent thing. How easy it was for someone to decide you no longer counted. "Where's your grandmother now?" he asked. Arya's voice thinned. "She's not around anymore." There was a finality to it that told him not to push. He leaned back, considering the weight of what she'd told him. If she was right, if Lucas and Miranda really were planning a fraudulent contract to justify moving money, it wasn't just a corporate coup, it was criminal. And if he confronted them without proof, they'd bury him before sunrise. "Arya," he said carefully, "do you know what you've done tonight?" She gave a tiny shrug. "Warned you. You've done more than that. You've given me a chance to stop them." She tilted her head, studying him as if trying to gauge whether he was the kind of man who could win a fight like that. "I'll need to know every word," he said. "Every detail." She nodded, and she told him. For the next 20 minutes, the diner became their war room. Arya recited the conversation with eerie precision, the cadence of Lucas's voice, the way Miranda's laugh had a sharp edge, the sound of a chair scraping when someone leaned back. She even remembered the rhythm of their pauses, the little silences that made the lies feel more real. Ethan listened, piecing it together in his mind like shards of glass forming a picture. The pattern was clear. Lucas and Miranda had been laying the groundwork for months, using the foreign contract as a shield. The moment it was signed, they'd call for an emergency board vote under the guise of strategic leadership restructuring. With Lucas as interim CEO and Miranda controlling the flow of information, they'd bleed the company from the inside while blaming the market. And by the time anyone noticed, they'd be gone, with millions. "You understand," Ethan said slowly, "that if you're wrong, this could destroy my career. If I accuse them without proof, I'm not wrong." Her certainty was a blade. Ethan sat back, letting the weight of it settle. She was right. He believed her, but belief wouldn't hold up in a boardroom or a courtroom. He needed evidence. Solid, irrefutable, damning evidence. And he knew just the man to help him get it. "Have you ever heard of Carter Vega?" he asked. Arya shook her head. "He used to be Caldwell Tech's internal investigator. Best I ever saw. He could find a leak in a locked vault, but a year ago, Lucas convinced the board to cut his department. Said it was a waste of money." "Let me guess," Arya said. "It wasn't about money." "No, it was about removing the only person who could have caught them." Arya leaned forward. "So bring him back." Ethan almost smiled at her directness. "That's the plan." They left the diner just after midnight, the streets slick from a passing rain. Ethan drove in silence, his mind already rehearsing what he'd say to Carter. Beside him, Arya watched the city slide past. Brick buildings, shuttered shops, pools of light from street lamps. "You really think you can stop them?" she asked. "I know I can," he said. "If I move fast enough." "And if you don't?" Ethan glanced at her. "Then they win. And people like that don't just take your company. They take everything you've built, everything you stand for, and they leave you wondering why you ever trusted them in the first place." Arya didn't respond. She didn't need to. When they pulled up in front of Ethan's building, he reached for his phone. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "I'll call Carter. But for now, you need a place to stay." "I'm fine." "You're a kid sleeping in parking garages and eavesdropping on corporate conspiracies. That's not fine." She looked away, jaw tightening. "Just for tonight," he added. "One night under a roof. No strings." After a long pause, she nodded. Inside his apartment, Arya moved carefully, like each step was testing unfamiliar ground. She paused at the threshold of the living room, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the quiet hum of the city far below. "Bathroom's down the hall," Ethan said. "Guest room's at the end." She didn't say thank you, but she didn't need to. Later, as Ethan stood by the window with a glass of water, he saw her shadow pass in the hallway, heading toward the guest room. For the first time in years, he felt something in his chest he couldn't quite name, something between resolve and responsibility. Tomorrow, the war would begin. But tonight, he'd taken the first step. They laughed at you like a man past his prime. Arya said it as steam from her hot chocolate blurred the space between them. The late-night diner was the same as before, the neon sign outside still buzzing faintly, but the sound inside had changed. The faint clink of a spoon against porcelain, the dry tick of the wall clock, the suppressed weight of a sigh lodged somewhere in Ethan's chest. He didn't look Arya in the eye immediately. He studied the sugar grains scattered on the tabletop, the thin shoulders of the girl sitting straight as a pulled string, the cold, bruised night sky beyond the glass. Only then did he lift his gaze. Exactly what did they say? Ethan asked, his voice steady but his eyes not. Arya nodded as if confirming a recorded clip. Lucas said that for Caldwell Tech to survive, this ship needs a younger captain. Miranda said, he likes to trust people, and that kills a company faster than any crisis. They called you an outdated machine that never updates its software. Then they laughed. Ethan's smile didn't reach his eyes. It was the kind of smile that carved a cold line at the corner of his mouth. He leaned back, but the chair seemed to retreat, letting him slide into the bottom of a well lined with mirrors, reflecting every time he had let something pass. An advance consultancy invoice extended twice. A risk report vanishing from the agenda at the last minute. A urgent business trip coinciding exactly with a closed-door board meeting. Scattered dots suddenly connected into a straight, unbroken line. And the contract? He asked. The one they called a placeholder. Arya set her cup down, wrapping her small hands around it to steady them. I heard Lucas read aloud a section on pre-operational cloud infrastructure advisory services, but Miranda said it was really just an authorization to funnel money through a shell company called Novaster Limited. She said Novaster was registered in the Virgin Islands. Lucas added, everything is legitimate if the minutes say it's pre-deployment advisory fees. Ethan blinked slowly. Novaster. The name flashed through his memory like a blade. Somewhere in the dense appendix of Q2, a strange invoice had appeared and disappeared. He had asked about it. Miranda had smiled, brushing it away like dust off a desk. A partner of a partner, a tiny expense. Then he'd been pulled away for a fundraising trip, and the matter had slipped from his hands like a thin sheet of paper. Do you remember any numbers? Ethan leaned in, his voice dropping lower. Amounts, percentages, transfer dates. Arya closed her eyes, as if hitting rewind. Miranda said, only 3.2% of the contract's value. But Lucas corrected her. 3.25 to match the currency table and avoid a ripple. They argued about the timing. Miranda wanted to split it into 2 installments over 10 days. Lucas said to do it all at 9:12 a.m. When Caldwell's bank reconciliation system is processing the first log batch, it'll look like a base fee. He used those exact words, base fee. 9:12, an oddly precise moment, perfectly chosen to hide under the hum of automated systems. Ethan felt his heartbeat shift, cold and mechanical. He was that sharp. And he had sat in Ethan's own boardroom, smiling about pushing him to the margins. And the foreign client? Ethan asked, his hand unconsciously finding the edge of an old business card in his jacket pocket. Name of the company? Arya shook her head. They didn't say the name, just the European partner, and they called the head of it Mr. Mathis. Miranda imitated his English accent, drawing out the "eth" and laughing. Lucas said, clean enough for audit, blurred enough to hide intent. Mathis. Ethan sifted through a mental archive of delayed calls, odd CCs, a name flickering for a second in the participants' list of a Zoom meeting. He couldn't place it, but he remembered a cover note Miranda had sent with the title, For Signature Alignment, a pale page with M&T Advisors, Luxembourg, in the footer. No Mathis, but the M was written in a distinctly European style, the diagonal strokes nearly parallel. He had signed the cover page to keep the pace, as Miranda had said. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on the table, hiding the tension in his wrists. What else did they say about me? His voice was almost calm, but Arya heard the gravel in it. Miranda said, Arya met his eyes, that tomorrow you'd thank them for freeing you of the burden, then write a graceful letter about generational transition. Lucas said he'd feed that letter to the press ahead of time. They said you'd keep quiet for the good of the company, because you always keep your word. Another knife, but this time it didn't glance off. It stayed, as if it had been waiting for the right angle all along. Ethan saw clearly now a night 6 months ago, standing on Caldwell's rooftop, wind pulling at his coat. Miranda calling to tone down the speech about trust, because investors want to hear the roadmap. He'd agreed. He'd thought it was smart. In truth, he had cut away one of his own lifelines. Arya, he said slowly, why were you on the 10th floor? Because it's quiet there, she answered without thinking. Then, after a beat, and because grown-ups think no one small would dare be near a door that says staff access only. You have a badge? Eyes. She shrugged. The door was ajar, and everyone was too busy feeling important. Ethan didn't laugh. He saw a shard of himself in that answer. The times he had passed janitors without lifting his eyes from his phone, the casual hallway conversations he thought were harmless, the dry jokes at the espresso machine. It wasn't that he'd been blind. He'd simply chosen to look far, leaving the near unguarded. And Lucas had built a tunnel right beneath his feet. All right, he said, pushing his cup aside in a deliberate motion. Let's put the pieces together. Arya didn't blink. What pieces do you have? Ethan pulled them out of memory like envelopes from a locked drawer. Q1. Pre-contract advisory fees up 11%, though the number of contracts hadn't changed. I asked. Miranda sent me a breakdown Lucas had prepared, citing market shifts. Around the same time, a new vendor popped up on the approved list. Halberd Systems, registered to a mail drop building in Delaware. No one ever met a real person. Halberd got $480,000 for infrastructure capability assessment, then vanished from all meeting schedules. Q2, risk report pulled from the agenda the same day I flew to San Jose. Q3, internal audit calendar paused to prioritize M&A. Anyone try to push back? Arya asked. Yes, Ethan exhaled. Carter Vega. He sent me 4 emails, no CCs, warning about rotating advance payment patterns. Lucas called me into his office, said Carter was paranoid, suggested cutting his department for redundancy. And I agreed. Arya tilted her head, her dark eyes catching a glint of light. They've been clearing the path for a while. Yes. Ethan let the word burn in his mouth. They've been removing bolts from the floor while I was giving talks about the future. He fell silent. The wall clock ticked 3 more beats. At a far-off booth, someone laughed, the sound breaking and dying mid-note. The smell of coffee suddenly felt harsh, like smoke. Don't let them make you the only witness, he said finally. We need paper, trails, things that can't be burned. Arya nodded. I know. Tomorrow, Ethan went on, they'll put me in that room, give me a fine pen, say all the right words. I'll sign, at least they'll think I will. Before then, I need to find Carter. Not because I'm flawless, because I need someone who knows exactly where the wind gets in. Arya was quiet for a long while. Can you trust anyone else? Ethan thought of the names he once believed were pillars. That list was now just empty chairs. Maybe the external legal team I hired directly? and someone on the independent audit board who once scolded me for lacking professional skepticism. Her name's Nora. Call them now, Arya said. So in the morning, we're not starting from zero. He nodded, pulling out his phone. Between calls, Arya went on, recounting in detail, Lucas pointing to a corner of the page marked Annex A, Miranda muttering about adjusting short-term bond maturities for padding, their joke about naming the project Phoenix, because he'll write the letter saying he needs a rest. Ethan turned those fragments into action items. Search Annex A in the SharePoint archive. Scan for Phoenix in the project list. Request email logs for Miranda for the last 3 months. Pull every invoice tied to Halberd, Novister, M&T advisors. He reached Nora just before 2 a.m. Her voice was rough, but her words cut sharp. You're telling me your own people are setting up a dummy contract to move money offshore? Then tomorrow you don't sign a damn thing unless the room's wired and you're not alone. I'll find Carter, Ethan said. Hanging up, he looked at Arya. Tired yet? She shook her head, though her eyelids dipped slightly. If I sleep, can you promise I'll wake up somewhere safe? He knew that wasn't a joke. He nodded. Here, he said, sliding her the keycard to his apartment. Private elevator, cameras at the door. No one gets in but me. Double lock. Arya didn't take it. Do you know why I trust you? Ethan paused. Because you hate them? No, she said. Because when I told you to be quiet, you stopped. Grown-ups usually think I'm making things up. You listened. And because I think I've seen you before. Where? Ethan asked. In Caldwell's lobby, Arya said, her gaze drifting. Once. You walked past an old cleaning lady, stopped to pick up her dropped cloth and put it back in her bucket. No one else noticed. I did. That was the first time I thought you weren't like them. Ethan didn't remember. Such a small act, lost in thousands of days, yet it had stayed with a child. Strangely, that memory tightened his anger into something controlled. A fire with walls and a hearth, not a blaze running wild. Tomorrow, he said, almost to his own reflection, they'll walk into their own trap. Arya exhaled as if a weight had lifted. If you want them to walk in, you have to make them think the door's open for them. You have a plan? He asked, half curious, half testing. Just, if they believe you're compliant, they'll get sloppy. Keep them busy with the controls they think matter, the mic they think they can cut, the signal they think they can block, and they won't notice the real ones. He allowed a brief smile. A strategist. I'm just a kid who spent too long in corners, she said evenly. From corners, you see more. They left the diner when the night was halfway spent. The air smelled faintly metallic, as if the city had been sharpened. Ethan hailed a car, avoiding his SUV. Tonight he trusted detours. They switched cabs twice, crossing golden-lit streets, a bridge over black water, before turning into his building. At the lobby, Ethan spoke briefly with the desk clerk, ensuring the cameras logged the timestamp. Carter had taught him, a solid case begins with solid markers. In the elevator, Arya watched the numbers climb. If tomorrow, she said softly, you're standing in front of them, what's the first thing you'll say? Ethan thought. He pictured Lucas's face, that calm emptiness, Miranda's eyes, smooth as high-grade glass. He saw the pen they'd hand him, the feigned concern, the blue glow washing out human color. Then he saw himself, hands on the table edge, voice low but filling the room. I'll say, Ethan answered. Thank you for preparing so thoroughly. Now here's my part. Arya nodded slightly, as if approving a line in a script. The doors opened. The hallway stretched like a slowed film reel. Ethan led Arya to the guest room, checked the locks, checked the cameras, checked again. The motions steadied him, reminded him of the early startup days, when he was the last to leave the office, turning off lights, touching chairbacks, picking up stray paper clips. Every night. Those were the nights he felt he was guarding something. "Sleep," he said. "We'll call Carter in the morning." Arya stood in the doorway, her hand on the wooden frame. "Ethan," she said, for the first time using his name alone. No titles, no last name. "Don't go soft." He met her gaze. "I won't." When the door shut, the apartment settled into a different kind of silence. Not emptiness, but anticipation. Ethan sat at the dining table, opened his laptop. He sent Nora a list of documents to lock down. He drafted an email to the outside firm with a cold, clear subject line. He downloaded every invoice with the Halberd name. He searched SharePoint for Annex A and Phoenix. The system spun like a hotel revolving door, turning endlessly before opening onto a hallway with no guaranteed exit. But this time he would plant blocks at every intersection. The pieces were finding each other now. Halberd leading to Novaster, Novaster to M&T Advisors, Annex A buried in a folder renamed Archive Maes. Phoenix, the code name for a hostile thesis dressed as restructuring. At the center of it, Lucas with a wine glass, smiling. Behind him, Miranda's hand on his shoulder once, now on the knife's hilt. Dawn had not yet come, but in some corner, gray light had begun to gather. Ethan rose, walked to a small wooden box. Inside was the fountain pen he'd been given the day Caldwell Tech went public. It had signed soft, elegant loops that opened many doors. Tomorrow they wanted him to sign with it, to turn that signature into his own noose. He turned it in his hand, the nib catching a glint. Then he set it down, like placing a pawn in a deliberate sacrifice, one meant to bait, not to lose. He glanced toward the guest room door. He thought of a child without a safe shoulder, of how Arya sat with her back to the wall to see the exits. He knew he owed her a promise, not just about the company. A promise that would mean more after it had walked through fire. "No soft hands," he murmured, almost without sound. Out there, the city stirred faintly. A garbage truck rumbled by, its wheels dragging the last scraps of the night. On Caldwell's 10th floor, the security light was likely still green, the glass table still polished, the conference room still set with bottled water and new pens. On that table, a thick packet waited. Called a contract, but really a highway for money to leave and power to return to the betrayers. But on Ethan's table now, another packet thickened. The list to secure, the names to call, the orders to file, the timestamps to anchor. And between two people in this apartment, there was a plan as thin as thread, but tied tight. To make them step into a trap they believed was theirs. He switched off the kitchen light. Darkness folded over the apartment like deep water. He sat by the window, head against the chair, eyes closed, not to sleep but to listen. To the city before shift change, to the company before judgment, to the child who had learned to turn corners into vantage points. Those sounds formed a strange melody, and in the chorus was an unspoken line. Tomorrow, no one will be allowed to lie. When he opened his eyes, the horizon had drawn a silver edge. He rose, brewed more coffee, the bitter warmth opening his lungs. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number, though his instincts knew it well. "Nora here. I've secured a temporary hold on the documents. Don't sign anything until I'm there." Another message followed. "Vega, Lambert's 7 a.m. I'll bring what you need to remember." Ethan nodded to himself. The pieces were locking into place like magnets finding each other in a spill of nails. He placed 2 glasses of water outside the guest room door without knocking. Then he returned to his schedule, inserting a precise 17-minute gap between two morning meetings. 9:12, Lucas had said. Good. 9:12 would also be the moment one door opened and another slammed shut. He looked once more at the fountain pen before tucking it into his jacket. The day Caldwell Tech went public, he'd said a line about signatures and promises. Today, he rewrote it in his mind. A signature isn't a promise. The truth is, and truth doesn't wait for you to be ready. He flexed his wrist, joints cracking like a switch thrown. The apartment lit with a thin strip of dawn. He walked to the door, paused a heartbeat, looked back at the quiet room, heard a small breath behind the guest room's wood, then placed his hand on the lock. As his grip tightened, the final pieces in his mind clicked into place. This morning they would think he was coming to sign. In reality, he was coming to take back what had been stolen, evidence, a company, and a silent part of himself. In the corner of the room, the first blade of sunlight fell, thin as a knife honed for its mark. And Ethan Caldwell, 51, CEO of Caldwell Tech, knew exactly which way it would cut when the clock struck 9:12. The smell of coffee and Lambert's hit Ethan before he saw the man. The place hadn't changed. Small square tables, wood worn smooth by elbows, the soft clink of mugs against saucers. But the back booth, the one pressed against the brick wall, held something the room hadn't seen in a year. Carter Vega was already there. He looked older, his dark hair cut short, silver creeping in at the temples, but the eyes were the same. Sharp, restless, cataloging everything. Carter didn't glance up right away. He finished stirring his coffee, slid the spoon out without a sound, and only then looked at Ethan. "I hear the wolves are circling," Carter said, his voice a low rasp. Ethan slid into the seat across from him. "They're not circling. They're inside the gates." Carter's gaze flicked to Aria, who had followed Ethan in and now stood at the edge of the booth. She didn't fidget. She just met his eyes like she was weighing him. "This her?" Carter asked. "This is Aria," Ethan said. "She's the reason I know what's coming." Carter gave her the smallest nod, an acknowledgement without ceremony. "You heard something." "I heard everything," Aria replied. For a second, Ethan saw the faintest curve at the corner of Carter's mouth. Respect, maybe, or recognition. Ethan leaned forward. "Lucas and Miranda have been setting up a false contract with a European shell. Novaster Limited, registered in the Virgin Islands. There's a name, Mathis, connected to M&T Advisors in Luxembourg. The money's meant to move at 9:12 this morning, right after I sign." "And if you sign, they vote you out," Carter said flatly. "They've been clearing the ground for months, removing internal checks, killing your department, hiding transactions through halberd systems, and at least 2 offshore entities." Carter sipped his coffee, eyes narrowing. "You've got specifics?" Ethan nodded toward Aria. She laid it out the way she had in the diner the night before. The door ajar on the 10th floor. Lucas tapping the paper. Miranda laughing. The phrase, "quiet removal." The exact percentage, 3.25. The timing, 9:12. The joke about calling the project Phoenix. Carter didn't take notes, but Ethan knew he didn't need to. The man's memory was a vault. When she finished, Carter set his cup down. "They're arrogant. That's good. Arrogance leaves fingerprints." "I need evidence before the meeting," Ethan said. "Hard proof. Paper trails. Audio, if possible." Carter leaned back, scanning Ethan's face. "And what's your end game?" "Expose them in front of the board. With federal observers in the room if I can swing it." "That's not just corporate politics," Carter said. "That's walking a live wire. One wrong move and you're the one in handcuffs while they toast each other in the Cayman Islands." "I know." Ethan's voice was steady. That's why I called you. For a moment, Carter said nothing. The morning rush was starting, the hiss of the espresso machine filling the pause. Then he reached into his jacket and slid a thin, battered folder across the table. Ethan opened it. Inside were printouts, transactions flagged months ago, each with Halberd's name buried in the fine print. A corporate registry document for Novaster. A still image from a security camera showing Miranda in the server room after midnight. These are from before they pushed me out, Carter said. I didn't have enough then. I might now. How? Ethan asked. Carter's eyes flicked to Arya again. Because if what she says checks out, we've got a live witness to conspiracy. And if Lucas and Miranda are arrogant enough to think you'll walk in blind, they won't have wiped their tracks yet. What's the fastest way in? Ethan asked. 2 paths, Carter said. 1, the finance server, mirrors all contracts and invoices before they hit the main ledger. 2, Miranda's private drive. She keeps personal notes on everything in case she needs leverage later. Ethan nodded slowly. Can you get into both? Carter smiled without humor. You didn't bring me back to play it safe, did you? Arya spoke up. They'll be distracted this morning, right? Getting ready for the meeting. That's when you go. Carter's brow lifted. You think like someone who's been around predators. I've been around people who think no one's watching, she said. Carter glanced at Ethan. She's right. We've got maybe 2 hours before they lock it down. I can get you into the building, Ethan said. But once we're in, I have to be seen. Keep up the act. You'll be on your own. I prefer it that way. Ethan pushed the folder back toward him. Then we move now. They reached Caldwell Tech just after 8. The lobby gleamed in the morning light, glass walls throwing back the city skyline. Employees flowed through the turnstiles, their badges flashing green. Ethan walked in as if it were any other day, Arya at his side, Carter a few paces behind. He nodded to the security guard, exchanged a casual word. On the surface, nothing was different. Beneath it, every step felt timed to a countdown. In the elevator, Ethan pressed the button for the 12th floor, executive offices. Carter got off on 9, slipping into the stream of employees without drawing a second glance. As the doors closed behind him, Arya leaned closer to Ethan. Do you trust him? Ethan's eyes stayed on the floor numbers ticking upward. I trust that he hates being played. On 9, Carter moved fast. He bypassed the main hallway, ducking into a side corridor where maintenance carts were parked. In his pocket was a key card that no longer officially worked, except for one door. The archive room. He slipped inside, shut the door quietly, and pulled a small device from his bag. It was a portable drive, modified to scrape entire directories without triggering alerts. He plugged it into the finance server terminal. Lines of code flickered across the screen. Invoices scrolled past, thousands of them, but he was looking for specific tags. Halberd, Novaster, M&T Advisors. The drive pulled them all, along with metadata, creation dates, user IDs. Then he switched to Miranda's directory, encrypted as expected. But Carter had seen her password habits before, 3 patterns, recycled with variations. On the 3rd try, the files opened. There it was, a folder named Phoenix. Inside, spreadsheets, board vote projections, draft press releases announcing Ethan's retirement, a scan of the Novaster contract with a section highlighted, Article 7.2, pre-operational advisory remittance. Carter copied everything. Upstairs, Ethan was in his office pretending to review the morning's agenda. Miranda appeared in the doorway, red scarf immaculate. Big day, she said, her smile polished. Isn't it? Ethan replied, matching her tone. She stepped inside, setting a pen on his desk. Thought you'd want to sign with this. A nice touch for the photographers. He picked it up, turning it between his fingers. Always thinking ahead, Miranda. That's my job, she said, eyes glinting. When she left, Ethan let the pen rest on the desk like a sleeping snake. He glanced at the clock. 8:37. Carter would be done soon. He had to be. On 9, Carter pulled the drive, wiped the connection log, and slid out the side door into a service stairwell. He took the stairs 2 at a time, heading for the 10th floor, conference level. At the landing, he paused. Voices drifted down the hall. Lucas's voice. Once the contract's signed, we move the funds immediately. By the time he realizes, the rest was muffled by the closing of a door. Carter smiled grimly. More fingerprints. He slipped into an unused meeting room, pulled out his phone, and sent Ethan a single text. Package secured. At 8:52, Ethan's phone buzzed. He read the message, then slid the device back into his pocket. Across the office, Aria sat in a chair by the window, her legs swinging just above the floor. It's done, Ethan said quietly. She nodded. Then all that's left is the part they see. Ethan looked at her, this child who had walked into his life from the shadows of a parking garage and handed him the key to the whole boardroom coup. When the time comes, you'll know what to do. I already do, she said. The board meeting was set for 9 sharp. By 8:58, the conference room was filling, directors taking their seats, Lucas and Miranda moving through the crowd with warm greetings and sharper eyes. At the far end, the foreign guest, Mathis, was speaking quietly to Lucas, his suit impeccable, his smile thin. Ethan entered last. The chatter dimmed. Lucas gestured to the empty chair at the head of the table. Shall we begin? He said. Ethan sat, placing the unsigned contract in front of him. The pen Miranda had given him lay to the side. Across the table, Carter's absence went unnoticed, but somewhere in the building the evidence was already on its way to someone who would know exactly what to do with it. Ethan glanced at the clock. 9 o'clock. 12 minutes until the transfer Lucas thought would change everything. 12 minutes until the trap closed. And for the first time in months, Ethan felt ready. From the outside, the conference room on the 10th floor looked like any other high-level meeting space. Polished glass walls, a long table gleaming under recessed lights, water bottles lined up like soldiers. But for Ethan, it might as well have been a stage set for an ambush. He'd been in hundreds of these rooms over his career, but today the air felt heavier, charged with something unseen. Miranda moved through the space with practiced grace, arranging papers in front of each board member, her red scarf a bright slash in the neutral palette of suits and mahogany. Lucas stood near the head of the table, smiling like a host about to toast his guests. Mathis was there too, silent and watchful, leaning toward Lucas as if they shared the punchline of a joke no one else had heard. Ethan took his seat. To his left, a carafe of water. To his right, the contract, its thick pages stapled in 3 neat sections. And beside it, the pen Miranda had placed in his hand less than half an hour ago. She caught his eye now, her smile tight. All set? Always, Ethan replied. But the truth was, the game was already in motion. Carter was somewhere in the building, his portable drive loaded with every incriminating file he'd pulled from the finance server and Miranda's private folder. Nora had secured a temporary hold on all financial documents related to the Novister deal. And Aria. Ethan's eyes flicked toward the far corner, where a storage alcove was hidden behind a frosted glass partition. The room beyond was empty, or so it appeared. In reality, Aria was crouched low, her knees tucked to her chest, a slim recording device clipped to her collar. Carter had shown her how to use it in under 5 minutes. 1 button to start, 1 to stop. It recorded directly to an encrypted card, leaving no wireless signal for security sweeps to detect. It was dangerous. Ethan knew that. but Arya had insisted. "They'll talk before the meeting starts," she'd said. "They'll say things they wouldn't say once everyone's here, and you need that on tape." Now, as the last board member settled into place, Ethan glanced at the clock. 9:04. Lucas cleared his throat. "Before we begin, I'd like to thank everyone for making time on such short notice. This is a pivotal day for Caldwell Tech, a day of transition, of forward vision." The words were smooth, practiced. Miranda stepped forward. "As you know, we've been in negotiations with an esteemed European partner, represented here today by Mr. Mathis. We've reached a framework that will position Caldwell Tech for unprecedented international growth. But to make that possible, we must also realign our leadership." There it was, the first public step. Ethan kept his expression neutral, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the contract. "In light of the changing market and the need for agile, innovative direction," Lucas said, "we believe a leadership transition is in the best interest of the company and its shareholders." A murmur moved through the room. "Ethan," Lucas continued, "your contributions have been invaluable, but the time has come for a new captain at the helm. This agreement," he gestured toward the contract, "ensures you step down with dignity, with an advisory role during the transition period, and full honors for your service." Miranda slid the pen closer to Ethan. "We know you'll do what's best for Caldwell Tech." In the alcove, Arya pressed herself against the wall, heart thudding. Through the narrow gap between the frosted panels, she could see Miranda's profile, the gleam of her scarf. She could also see Lucas leaning toward Mathis, his voice dropping. "They'll never see the Novaster transfer," Lucas murmured, "especially not with the timing. By the time the first log batch is reconciled, it's already buried." Mathis chuckled. "And the advisory fee clause?" "Bulletproof," Lucas said. "The Virgin Islands registration keeps it out of domestic jurisdiction. We could send it through 3 more shells if we wanted." Arya's thumb pressed the recorder button harder, though it didn't need the force. Every syllable etched itself into the card. Back at the table, Ethan let a slow breath pass through him. "So all I have to do is sign," he said. "That's right," Miranda replied, her tone soft, coaxing. "And once I do, the vote happens?" "Yes." Lucas's smile didn't waver. Ethan leaned back, letting the silence stretch just enough to make them shift in their seats. "Well then." 9:09. Arya's knees ached from crouching, but she didn't move. She could hear everything: Lucas's measured confidence, Miranda's quiet satisfaction, the subtle arrogance in Mathis's tone. She thought of the first night she'd seen Ethan standing by the SUV in the dim garage. He'd looked like someone bracing for a storm he couldn't name. Now she saw the storm's architects in their tailored suits and polished smiles. She pressed her lips together, holding still until the minute hand on the wall clock ticked forward. 9:11. In the same moment, Carter's phone buzzed in Ethan's pocket. One word: ready. Ethan straightened in his chair. "Before we proceed, I think it's only fair that we review a few items, just for clarity." Lucas's brow furrowed. "Everything's in the contract." "Of course," Ethan said. "But I'm a believer in transparency, and so are our partners at the federal level." The air shifted. Miranda's smile froze. Mathis's head tilted slightly, as if recalibrating. Ethan tapped the tablet in front of him. The wall screen behind him lit up, not with the contract, but with a document header. Novaster Limited, Corporate Registry, British Virgin Islands. "Where did you get that?" Miranda's voice was too sharp now. "Oh, I've been busy," Ethan said lightly. Another tap and the screen shifted to a spreadsheet. Phoenix Project, Draft Press Release. The first line read, "Ethan Caldwell announces retirement. Board names Lucas Crane interim CEO." Murmurs rose again. Lucas's jaw tightened. This is highly irregular. Irregular? Ethan's voice cut through the room. So is hiding a shell company inside a foreign advisory agreement to move funds offshore at 9:12 a.m. today. Silence. 9:12. In the alcove, Arya watched as Lucas's expression faltered for the first time. She clicked the recorder off, knowing she had exactly what they needed. She slipped out through the side door Carter had shown her, unseen. Back in the room, two figures appeared in the doorway, Nora holding a folder and a federal agent in a dark suit. The agent's voice was calm, almost conversational. "Mr. Crane, Ms. Hayes, please step away from the table." Miranda started to speak, but the agent raised a hand. "We'll do this without making a scene, but we have questions, a lot of them." As they were led out, Ethan didn't look away. He wanted them to see him watching. When the door closed, the room was still. Every board member's eyes were on him. Ethan stood, buttoned his jacket. "Shall we continue the meeting?" Outside in the hallway, Arya waited near the service elevator, the recorder in her pocket. When Ethan stepped out of the conference room, she didn't smile. She just held up the device. "They said it," she told him. "Every word." Ethan took the recorder, feeling its small weight. "Then it's over." Arya shook her head. "No, now it starts." He understood. The meeting had ended, but the war for Caldwell Tech, and for the truth, was just beginning. The elevator ride down from the 10th floor felt longer than usual, though Ethan knew it was just in his head. Beside him, Arya stood still, her hands buried deep in the pockets of her jacket, as if the recorder in one of them might vanish if she let it go. Somewhere above them, Lucas and Miranda were being escorted into a separate room by the federal agent. Mathis had disappeared the moment the meeting dissolved, likely to the street, where a black car waited with the engine running. When the doors slid open, the lobby's polished marble floors reflected the mid-morning light like a mirror. Employees moved through the space in quick bursts of motion, some on calls, others carrying files. But the usual corporate hum had shifted. People were talking in clusters, voices low, eyes darting. News traveled fast in buildings like this. Ethan kept his pace even, every movement controlled. He knew that in a crisis, optics were everything. Panic made you look guilty. At the security desk, Nora was waiting, her sharp eyes already scanning the lobby as if reading the building's pulse. "They've been separated," she said without preamble. "The feds will hold them here for initial questioning before moving them downtown. I've secured all physical and digital copies of the Novister agreement. If there's another copy, it's off-site." "Good," Ethan said. "Carter?" "Still in the building," Nora replied. "He's tying off loose ends on the server side. We'll have a clean, documented chain of custody on every file by noon." Ethan glanced at Arya. "And we've got the audio." Arya gave a single nod. She hadn't said much since they left the conference room. "Come with me," Nora said. "We'll set up in your office, quietly." The 12th floor was quieter than the lobby, but not by much. A few employees glanced up as Ethan passed, then quickly dropped their eyes as though unsure if they should greet him. He recognized the look. The split-second calculation of someone deciding whether a person was still in power. Inside his office, the blinds were half-drawn, muting the daylight. Carter was already there, hunched over Ethan's desk with a laptop. "Everything's mirrored to an encrypted drive," Carter said without looking up. "Files are tagged, time-stamped, and logged. Miranda's Phoenix folder had drafts of the board statement, the press release, and, get this, 3 resignation letters for you. All slightly different. My guess? They were deciding which version to leak, depending on how you reacted today." Ethan's jaw tightened. "We'll keep those." Carter's fingers kept moving over the keys. "Also found something else. An older Novaster contract, unsigned. This one mentions two other shell companies, Delacroix Holdings and Furwin Limited, both dissolved last year. Trail to follow later, Nora said. For now, we focus on the current contract and the money transfer scheduled for 13 minutes ago. Carter turned the laptop so they could see the screen. I put a hold on all outgoing wires over $50,000 from Caldwell accounts. Lucas's transfer request will bounce, and because it's flagged under suspicious activity, the bank will have to notify the feds directly. Ethan exhaled slowly. So they're cornered. For now, Carter said. But people like Lucas always think they have a way out. As if on cue, the desk phone rang. The caller ID showed the internal extension for legal. Ethan answered. Mr. Caldwell, the voice said, smooth and measured. This is Alan from legal. Lucas and Miranda have requested to speak with you privately before leaving the building. They say it's urgent. Nora's eyebrows rose. Ethan didn't hesitate. Where? The board lounge, Alan said. Ethan hung up. They want to make a deal. Or test your leverage, Carter said. Either way, they think they can still salvage something. Nora crossed her arms. Do you want backup? Ethan shook his head. No. But I'll take Arya. Arya's head snapped up. Me? They already know you were in the building, Ethan said. What they don't know is how much you heard, or that I believe you. Sometimes presence is its own message. The board lounge was tucked behind the conference rooms, a place designed for quiet conversations over coffee, away from the main flow of meetings. Today it felt more like neutral ground before a duel. Lucas was seated in one of the leather chairs, jacket unbuttoned, posture loose. Miranda stood near the window, her scarf gone, her hair pulled back sharply. Both had the composed look of people trying not to show how much ground they'd lost. Ethan, Lucas said, rising slightly in a mock greeting. We need to talk. You mean bargain, Ethan replied. Lucas gestured for him to sit. We're all adults here. What happened this morning? What happened, Ethan cut in, is that you tried to steal my company through a fraudulent contract and a hidden offshore transfer, and you were sloppy enough to talk about it within earshot of a witness. Lucas's eyes flicked toward Arya. The kid? Arya didn't flinch. The kid who remembers every word you said. Miranda's lips pressed into a thin line. You think one recording will be enough? We've been here a long time, Ethan. We know where the skeletons are. Are you threatening me? Ethan asked. Stating reality, Miranda said. Lucas leaned forward. Here's our proposal. You drop this. No press, no federal circus, and we walk away quietly. We even sign over certain assets to keep you whole. In return, you destroy whatever you think you have on us. Ethan let the silence stretch. And why would I agree to that? Because, Lucas said, his voice dropping, you don't want the market to know how close Caldwell Tech came to a public implosion under your watch. Stocks don't care about heroes, Ethan. They care about stability. You drag this out, you might win the fight, but you lose the company. Ethan studied him. You've already lost the company. You just don't see it yet. Arya stepped forward, her voice steady. You're still talking like you're in control. You're not. You can't even move the money. You know that, right? The bank flagged your transfer. The feds already have your Novaster registry. For the first time, something flickered across Lucas's face. Uncertainty, quickly masked. Miranda's fingers tightened on the back of the chair. Ethan stood. This conversation is over. Lucas rose too, but the casual veneer was gone now. You'll regret this, he said. Maybe, Ethan said, but you'll regret it sooner. He turned, motioning for Arya to follow. As they walked out, Ethan felt Lucas's stare burning between his shoulders, but he didn't look back. Back in his office, Nora was waiting with an update. The feds have enough to detain them for questioning. It's not an arrest yet, but it will be. Good, Ethan said. Then we keep pressing until it is. Arya handed the recorder to Carter. Make a copy, 2 copies, hide 1. Carter smirked. Already ahead of you. Ethan looked at the clock. The morning wasn't over, but the hardest part, the moment of walking into the lion's den, had passed, and they'd come out with their teeth intact. Still, he knew Carter was right. Lucas and Miranda wouldn't go quietly. This was only the first battle, but it was a win. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt the weight shift. Not off his shoulders entirely, but enough to take a full breath. The boardroom was no longer just a meeting space. It was an arena. The air hummed with the restless silence of people who knew they were about to witness something irreversible. By mid-afternoon, word of the morning's events had spread through Caldwell Tech like wildfire. Directors who had been absent for the initial meeting were called back in. Legal counsel, PR representatives, and even a few carefully invited journalists had found their way to the perimeter of the 10th floor. Ethan stood at the head of the table, hands resting lightly on the polished wood. Beside him, Nora sorted a stack of documents into precise, intimidating order. Across from them, Lucas and Miranda sat shoulder to shoulder, each flanked by their own attorneys. Lucas's smile had returned, but it was different now, more rigid, more forced. Miranda's red scarf was back, tied tighter than before. The room was full, but the real moment hadn't begun yet. Ethan knew it. Lucas knew it. Everyone was waiting for the trigger. "Shall we proceed?" Lucas said, his voice carrying just enough charm to sound like he was still in control. Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the far corner of the room. The door opened and Arya stepped in. The shift in the room was almost physical. No one had expected her, certainly not Lucas or Miranda. The sight of a child walking into a high-stakes corporate showdown was enough to pull every gaze in her direction. She moved calmly, almost deliberately, to stand beside Ethan. She was small compared to the imposing table, but there was something about the steadiness in her eyes that made her impossible to dismiss. "This," Ethan said, his voice steady, "is Arya. She was in the building last night. She heard Lucas Crane and Miranda Hayes discuss in detail their plan to remove me from this company by orchestrating a fraudulent foreign contract. She recorded their words." Lucas's attorney shifted in his seat. "We're not entertaining testimony from an unsworn minor." Ethan held up a hand. "No one needs to take my word for it. We can all hear it for ourselves." Nora pressed a small remote, and the speakers built into the conference room ceiling came alive with static. Then, Lucas's voice filled the air. "They'll never see the Novaster transfer. By the time the first log batch is reconciled, it's already buried." Mathis's chuckle followed. Then Miranda's voice. "The Virgin Islands registration keeps it out of domestic jurisdiction." A ripple of reaction moved through the room, some gasps, some mutters, all sharp. Lucas sat forward. "This is taken out of context." Arya's voice, smaller but clear, cut through. "You said it. Exactly like that." Miranda's eyes narrowed. "You were spying on us." "No," Arya said, her tone like flint. "I was listening. There's a difference. Spying is for lies. Listening is for the truth." The silence that followed was electric. Ethan stepped in. "We also have documentation, emails, file metadata, and draft statements, proving Project Phoenix was not a legitimate restructuring plan, but a cover for moving millions through Novaster Limited. The Phoenix folder was found on Ms. Hayes' private drive, along with 3 versions of a resignation letter for me." Nora began distributing copies of the most damning documents down the table. The sound of paper sliding on wood was like a drumbeat. One director, a man who had been mostly silent in past meetings, spoke up. "Lucas, Miranda, these are your words, your documents. How do you explain this?" Lucas's lawyer whispered something to him, but Lucas waved it off. "This is a power play. Ethan is manufacturing a scandal to keep his seat, and he's using a child as a prop." Arya's chin lifted. "You think I don't know what I heard?" Lucas turned his gaze on her, the smile gone. "You're a kid. You don't understand how business works." "Maybe," Arya said, her voice unshaken. "But I understand when someone plans to take something that isn't theirs. I've lived with people like you, and I know the sound of laughing when you think no one's listening." Something about the way she said it, calm, unhurried, landed harder than any raised voice could have. Ethan let the silence work for a beat, then spoke to the room. "This is not just about my position. This is about the integrity of this company. If Lucas and Miranda had succeeded, they would have stripped millions in assets, laundered them through offshore entities, and left Caldwell Tech to take the fall. Every person in this room would have been complicit by inaction." One by one, the director's expressions shifted, from doubt to discomfort to something closer to anger. Nora leaned toward Ethan. "They're with you," she murmured. Ethan straightened. "I'm calling for an immediate vote to remove Lucas Crane and Miranda Hayes from all positions within Caldwell Tech, effective immediately, pending the outcome of the federal investigation." The room erupted in overlapping voices, lawyers objecting, directors conferring in hurried whispers. But the motion had been made, and in corporate law, that meant it had to be addressed. The vote was called. It wasn't unanimous, nothing this big ever was, but it was decisive. The tally landed with a finality that even Lucas couldn't mask. The board chair, a woman with a measured voice and a spine of steel, delivered the result. "The motion passes. Mr. Crane, Ms. Hayes, you are relieved of your duties, effective immediately." Security entered the room quietly, efficiently. Lucas stood, his eyes locked on Ethan. "You think this is over?" Ethan met his gaze. "I think you're out of time." Miranda didn't speak as they were escorted out, but her glance at Arya lingered, cold, calculating, the kind of look that promised this wasn't the last chapter. When the door closed behind them, the room exhaled as one. Ethan turned to Arya. "You did well." She looked up at him. "I wasn't doing it for them." "I know," he said. The board chair cleared her throat. "Mr. Caldwell, you have the floor." Ethan faced the table. "We rebuild. We tighten controls, restore oversight, and we remember what this place is supposed to stand for. Caldwell Tech doesn't survive because of clever deals or hidden accounts. It survives because people trust us. That's what's been damaged, and that's what we're going to fix." For the first time in months, he saw nods around the table that weren't just politeness. They were agreement. When the meeting adjourned, Ethan and Arya walked out together. In the hallway, Carter was leaning against the wall, arms folded. "Told you they'd hang themselves," Carter said. Ethan allowed himself the smallest smile. "With a little help." Carter looked at Arya. "You've got instincts. Ever think about a career in corporate investigations?" She shrugged. "Depends on the snacks." Ethan laughed, just once, but it was real. They stepped into the elevator. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt the floor under him was solid, but deep down, he knew Miranda's look hadn't been an idle one. The battle for Caldwell Tech might be over, but the war wasn't finished. The press was waiting before Ethan and Arya even reached the street. The main entrance of Caldwell Tech was lined with camera crews and reporters, microphones thrust forward, voices overlapping in a chorus of shouted questions. The glass doors turned into a flashing wall of reflected light as bulbs popped in rapid succession. "Mr. Caldwell, is it true your own board tried to oust you? Was the Novaster deal fraudulent from the start? Who is the girl with you?" Ethan kept walking, one hand lightly on Arya's shoulder, guiding her through the narrow corridor security had carved between them and the crowd. He didn't break stride, didn't answer. Not yet. Inside the waiting black SUV, the noise dulled to a low roar behind closed doors. Arya stared out the tinted window, watching the reporters' faces blur into a smear of motion. "They're going to find out who I am," she said quietly. Ethan fastened his seatbelt. "They'll try. But that doesn't mean they'll get the whole story." She turned to look at him. "And if they do?" "Then we make sure they hear it from us first." By the time they reached his apartment, the news cycle was already in overdrive. Every major business outlet was running some variation of the same headline. "Caldwell Tech Power Struggle Erupts in Boardroom Showdown." The subtler publications framed it as a governance dispute. The more sensational ones used words like coup and betrayal. On one network, a grainy still from the morning's security footage looped on screen. Ethan at the head of the table, Lucas mid-gesture, Miranda watching with a closed-mouth smile. Then the image cut to an even grainier shot of Arya walking into the room. The caption read, "Mystery Girl Interrupts Board Meeting." Arya sat on the couch, knees drawn up, watching herself become a story she didn't agree to. "They're making it sound like I just wandered in," she muttered. "That's because they don't have the facts," Ethan said from the kitchen, where he was pouring coffee. "And the people who do don't want them out yet." Carter, perched on the arm of a chair, scrolled through his phone. "You've got both Wall Street and the FBI watching your next move, Ethan." The stock dipped 8% on the opening bell but clawed back to -3 after the vote went public. Investors hate uncertainty, but they hate fraud more. Nora, seated at the dining table with her laptop open, didn't look up. "The federal team wants a formal statement from you by tomorrow morning. They're also requesting to speak with Arya. Off the record first." Arya's head snapped up. "Off the record means they can still use it later, right?" Nora met her gaze. "It means they want to understand what you know before it becomes part of the official investigation. You'll have an advocate in the room. But yes, what you say could still matter later." Arya didn't answer right away. Ethan walked over, coffee in hand, and sat across from her. "It's your choice." "No one's forcing you." She studied his face. "You really mean that?" "Yes," he said. "I'm asking for your help, not demanding it." Something in her shoulders eased. "Then I'll think about it." By evening, the fallout had spread beyond Caldwell Tech. Lucas and Miranda's faces were plastered across business blogs, their past deals dissected for patterns. Mathis had vanished from public view entirely, fueling speculation about his connection to Novaster and other offshore entities. Ethan's phone buzzed constantly. Calls from allies, wary check-ins from board members, thinly veiled threats from numbers he didn't recognize. He ignored most of them. Instead, he focused on Arya. She'd gone quiet, retreating into herself in a way that reminded him of their first night in the diner. "You're thinking about something," he said as they sat in the living room. She nodded, eyes fixed on the city lights beyond the window. "About my grandma." "She used to say the worst thing about liars is how they make you question your own eyes." Ethan leaned forward. "She sounds like she was smart." "She was." Arya's voice thinned. "She worked in the same building as you. A long time ago." Ethan stilled. "What did she do?" "Facilities. She was the one they called when something broke but didn't want to pay an outside contractor for. She knew every hallway, every maintenance closet. And she knew who people really were when they thought no one important was looking. A memory tugged at Ethan's mind, an older woman with sharp eyes, quick hands, always moving as if she were on borrowed time. He'd seen her in passing years ago, but he couldn't place the name. "What was she called?" he asked. "Margaret Caldwell," Arya said. The name landed like a stone dropped in still water. Ethan sat back, the ripples spreading through years of unasked questions. Margaret Caldwell, his father's cousin. They'd lost contact in the late 80s after a family split no one wanted to talk about. He hadn't even known she was still in the city. "She never told me about you," Arya said. "I didn't know about you," Ethan replied. "Not until now." For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The space between them felt different, less like chance, more like something that had been waiting. Later that night, after Carter and Nora had left, Ethan stood by the window with his phone. He scrolled past the flood of messages until he found one from a number stored under a name he hadn't touched in years. Uncle Raymond. The text was short. "Heard about the girl. If she's Margaret's, she's family. Do what's right." Ethan looked over at the couch, where Arya had fallen asleep with the TV still flickering. She looked smaller when she slept, but the stubborn set of her jaw was still there. The next morning began with another wave of headlines. Federal agents question Caldwell Tech executives in offshore contract probe sources. Underage witness. Key to case. By 9 a.m., the FBI liaison had arrived at Ethan's apartment. Nora was already there, sitting beside Arya at the kitchen table. The agent was professional, careful. "This isn't a deposition," she assured Arya. "We just want to hear your version of events. You can stop at any time." Arya glanced at Ethan. He gave a single nod. And then she told it. The vending machine hum, the cracked door on the 10th floor, Lucas's voice, Miranda's laugh, the details of the contract, the timing of the transfer. She recited it all as if she'd pressed play on a recording in her mind. When she finished, the agent closed her notebook. "You have a good memory," she said. Arya shrugged. "You remember things when you don't get many chances to speak." The agent exchanged a look with Nora, then stood. "This helps." "A lot." When she left, Arya leaned back in her chair. "So now what?" "Now," Ethan said, "we keep going. The investigation moves forward, and we make sure you're not just a footnote in their story." She studied him for a moment. "You mean our story?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Yes, our story." That afternoon, Caldwell Tech issued its official statement. It was measured, but it left no doubt about where the company stood. The board of directors has acted decisively to remove individuals whose actions were not in line with the company's ethics and values. Caldwell Tech will cooperate fully with all federal investigations and remains committed to transparency and accountability. The market responded with caution, but the free fall had stopped, and in the quiet between phone calls, Ethan found himself thinking less about share prices and more about the girl sitting across from him, flipping through a photo album Nora had brought from the archives. On one page was a picture of Margaret Caldwell in her work uniform, standing in the old lobby of Caldwell Tech. She had the same eyes as Arya. Ethan realized, with a kind of clarity he hadn't felt in years, that Lucas and Miranda's betrayal had given him something they never intended. A connection to family he hadn't known he was missing. And he knew, as surely as he'd known when to walk into the boardroom, that he wasn't going to let go of it. And when it came, he and Arya would be ready. The rain started just after dawn, thin silver lines slipping down the windows of Ethan's office. It had been nearly a week since the boardroom unmasking, and Caldwell Tech was running on a strange blend of relief and exhaustion. Lucas and Miranda were under federal investigation, their assets temporarily frozen. Mathis was still in the wind, but his name had surfaced in connection to at least 2 other corporate fraud cases in Europe. Every day, new pieces of the puzzle came in, some from Carter's digging, others from Nora's coordination with the FBI. But for Ethan, the center of gravity had shifted. He sat behind his desk, staring at an old family photograph that Nora had unearthed from the Caldwell archives. In the picture, Margaret Caldwell stood in front of a modest brick house, her hand resting on the shoulder of a boy no older than 10, Ethan himself. He remembered that day dimly, a summer afternoon, the smell of cut grass, the sound of her voice telling him to stand up straight. And now, decades later, her granddaughter was sitting in the next room, flipping through a book on architectural design as if she had nowhere else to be. At 9:15, Ethan walked into the lounge area where Aria was curled in an armchair. She looked up from the book, eyes alert. "I have a question for you," Ethan said. "Okay. Do you know much about your family history?" Aria shrugged. "Not really. Grandma didn't talk about it much. She said most of the people we were related to didn't want to be found." Ethan sat across from her. "Your grandmother was my cousin." Aria blinked. "That makes you what to me?" "Your first cousin once removed, technically. But that's not the point." "What's the point?" "That you're family." Aria leaned back, arms crossed, not defensive, but weighing. "You didn't know about me until last week." "That's true," Ethan admitted. "But knowing now, I can't ignore it." For a moment, neither spoke. The rain tapped softly against the glass. Finally, Aria said, "What would you do about it?" "I'd like to make sure you have a place here," Ethan said. "Not just for a few weeks, not just until this case is over. Permanently." Her brow furrowed. "Like, live here?" "Yes," Ethan said. "Live here. Be part of my life. Have stability. And if you wanted, we could make it official." "Official?" "I mean, adoption." The word seemed to hang in the space between them. Aria stared at him, her fingers tightening around the edges of her book. "You'd want to do that? Even though I'm me?" Ethan leaned forward. "Especially because you're you. You're sharp. You're brave. You've been through more than most adults I know, and you still stand up when it matters. Those are the people I want in my family." Her eyes searched his face for any trace of pity, but she found none. "You don't have to answer now," he said. "Just think about it." That evening, Nora came by with updates from the investigation. "The feds are moving to formally charge Lucas and Miranda with conspiracy and wire fraud," she said, setting a folder on the table. "They're offering reduced charges if they cooperate against Mathis." "Will they?" Ethan asked. "Lucas will if he thinks it'll save him," Nora said. "Miranda's harder to read." Aria was listening from the kitchen counter. "They'll both talk," she said. Nora glanced at her. "What makes you so sure?" "Because they like being the smartest person in the room," Aria said. "And when they're in custody, the only way to be that again is to tell the story before someone else does." Nora raised her eyebrows at Ethan. "She's not wrong." The next morning, Ethan arranged a visit to the old Caldwell family records in the company's historical archive. It wasn't just nostalgia. He wanted Aria to see for herself. They walked through rows of metal shelving, the air smelling faintly of paper and time. Ethan pulled a file from a box marked Calwell, Personal Correspondence, 1975 to 1990. Inside were letters between his father and Margaret, short notes about family gatherings, longer ones about company struggles. One photograph stopped Aria in her tracks. Margaret, in her maintenance uniform, standing beside the Caldwell Tech Service elevator, holding a toolbox. "She was younger there," Aria murmured. "She worked here for almost 20 years, Ethan said. People like Lucas and Miranda probably never even learned her name. But she kept this place running when no one else could." Aria traced the edge of the photo with her finger, her voice quiet. She'd like that I'm here now. I think she would, Ethan said. Back at the apartment that night, Arya surprised him. I've been thinking, she said, about what you asked me. Ethan set his coffee down. And? I don't want to feel like I'm just staying here until you get tired of me. I've had enough of that. So if you mean it about adoption, then yes. Ethan didn't move for a second, letting the weight of her words settle. Then he nodded. I mean it. For the first time since he'd met her, Arya smiled without guarding it. 2 days later, Ethan sat in his lawyer's office, the paperwork for guardianship spread out before him. There were still steps to take, background checks, interviews, but the process had begun. When he left the office, he found Arya waiting in the lobby, sketching in a small notebook. What's that? He asked. She turned the pad toward him. It was a simple drawing of a tall building, Caldwell Tech, with a tiny figure standing on the rooftop, looking out over the city. Who's that? He asked. Could be anyone, she said. Could be you. Could be me. Ethan looked at the drawing for a long moment. Maybe it's us. That evening, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, spilling gold light across the city. From the apartment balcony, they watched it together, the skyline sharp against the glowing sky. Somewhere behind them, Caldwell Tech was still recovering, still fighting its way back to stability. The investigation wasn't over, and there were still people, dangerous people, who would rather see both of them gone. But for the first time, Ethan felt like the future wasn't just about survival. It was about building something worth keeping. And he knew, as surely as he knew the city would light up when night came, that Arya was going to be part of it. 1 year later, the 10th floor boardroom looked nothing like the place where Ethan had nearly lost everything. The long, intimidating glass table had been replaced by a warmer, oval oak one. The walls that once displayed abstract art now held framed photographs of Caldwell Tech teams, engineers in hard hats at construction sites. Programmers crowded around a screen, janitorial staff laughing over cake in the break room. Ethan stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the late-morning sunlight spill across the skyline. He'd been in this building for decades, but it had never felt like this. Alive, transparent, unafraid. Mr. Caldwell? A voice called from the doorway. He turned. It was one of the younger staffers from the PR team holding a clipboard. They're ready for you downstairs. Ethan smiled. On my way. The lobby was buzzing. Cameras flashed, reporters lined up along velvet ropes, and a stage had been set just inside the glass entrance. In the center was a polished wooden podium, draped with a banner reading, Margaret Caldwell Scholarship Fund Inspiring Futures from Every Walk of Life. The idea had come to him in the quiet days after the investigation ended. He'd told Arya that if they were going to put her name in the papers, it should be for something worth remembering. Naming the foundation after her grandmother felt right, an acknowledgement of the woman who had kept the company's lights on when no one else cared. Now, as the audience settled, Arya stood off to the side of the stage in a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back. She was 8 now, taller, her face a little older, but her eyes still carrying the same steady focus. Ethan stepped up to the podium. A year ago, he began, this company faced a challenge that went beyond numbers on a balance sheet. We faced a test of trust. Trust between colleagues, between leadership and employees, and between the company and the community it serves. We came through that test stronger, not because of me alone, but because of people who were willing to speak when it mattered most. He looked toward Arya. One of those people was standing in a parking garage on a cold night, watching and listening when no one else would have. Because of her, we stopped something that could have destroyed not just this company, but the livelihoods of hundreds of families. A murmur of recognition moved through the crowd. That night, Ethan continued, she gave me more than information. She gave me the chance to do the right thing. And in the process, I found something I didn't know I was missing. Family. He stepped aside and gestured for Arya to join him. She walked to the podium with calm, sure steps, not looking at the cameras but at the faces in the crowd. She cleared her throat. The day I met Ethan, I thought I was just warning him about something bad that was going to happen. I didn't know it would change everything. I didn't know I'd find a place to stay, or someone who'd listen when I said something important. Her gaze flicked toward Ethan briefly, then back to the audience. This scholarship is for kids like me. Kids who maybe don't get noticed right away, but who have something important to say or do. It's for kids who just need someone to believe them the first time. It wasn't long, but it didn't need to be. The applause swelled until it filled the entire lobby. After the ceremony, they stood together at the edge of the crowd, letting the staff and reporters mingle. Carter came over, hands in his pockets. You've turned this place upside down, Caldwell. In a good way. Ethan smirked. I had help. Carter crouched slightly so he was eye level with Arya. You ever think about joining the investigative side of things? We could use your kind of listening. Arya grinned. Maybe. But I've got school first. That's a good answer, Carter said, straightening. By late afternoon, the building had quieted. Ethan and Arya took the elevator to the roof, a place he'd avoided for months after the coup attempt, but which now felt like theirs. The city stretched out in every direction, sun turning the glass towers into sheets of gold. Arya leaned against the railing, her hair catching the light. You know, she said, I still think about that night sometimes. In the garage. So do I, Ethan said. Do you ever think, if I hadn't said anything, what would have happened? Ethan didn't hesitate. I would have lost the company. But worse, I wouldn't have met you. She was quiet for a moment. You're not just saying that? No, he said. If all of this had to happen for me to find you, then I'd go through it again. She turned to look at him fully. Even with the reporters and the lawyers and everything? Even with all of that, he said. Back downstairs, the last of the day's meetings wrapped up early. The two of them walked through the lobby together, the echoes of their footsteps the only sound. Near the front doors, Arya paused and looked up at the new plaque mounted on the wall. It bore her grandmother's name in bronze letters. Margaret Caldwell Scholarship Fund underneath, in smaller type, were the words, "Because every voice deserves to be heard." Arya reached up and traced the letters with her fingertips. She'd like this, she said softly. I know she would, Ethan replied. They stepped out into the evening. The city was alive with light and movement, but for once, neither of them was in a hurry. Ethan thought about all the years he'd spent building Caldwell Tech, believing his legacy would be measured in market share and quarterly gains. Now he understood it would be measured in something else entirely. The people he'd chosen to stand beside, and the ones who had chosen to stand beside him. Arya slipped her hand into his as they crossed the street. Ethan, she said. Yeah? That night in the garage, I thought I was saving your company. But really... She hesitated, then smiled. I think I was finding my family. Ethan's throat tightened. You were. And so was I. They kept walking, the glow of the city ahead of them, the noise of the world behind. Whatever came next, good or bad, they would face it the same way they had faced that night in the parking garage, together. And this time, there would be no shadows between them. This story could not have come to life without the spark of an idea that began with a single line, "Shut up, they can hear us." From that whisper in the dark grew a journey about trust, courage, and the unexpected bonds that become family. To every reader who has followed Ethan and Arya from the shadows of a parking garage to the light of a new beginning, thank you. You've walked with them through betrayal and hope, and in doing so, you've kept their story alive. To those who have ever been underestimated, overlooked, or silenced, may you find strength in your own voice, and may you meet someone who listens the first time. And to the real-life Margarets of the world, those who work quietly, keep the lights on, and notice what others don't, this is for you. Your legacy is in the lives you've touched, even if you never see the ripple yourself. Thank you for reading. May the next story you hear, or the next story you tell, change everything.